So I'm glad to be here to talk about designing great progressive web apps. So I'm going to start with a question. Have you noticed that the mobile web doesn't really feel good anymore? There are lots of problems on the mobile web. Lagging issues, performance issues. So let's see. The mobile web problems are nowadays being slow because the average load on mobile website is 19 seconds, and that's a lot on 3G networks. Also, have you noticed that the scrolling on mobile web is always unresponsive? It's lagging. It always needs a few more seconds to feel your touch on the mobile screen. And also, the content jumps a lot on the mobile web when it loads. If you scroll too fast and the website is still loading, you see things jumping. And also, if you open a website and you click on a button by mistake, and then you have to wait for like 19 seconds and then go back in order for you to see the previous page. So you don't really feel in control on the mobile web. But I'm here today to tell you that the web can feel good. And not just good, but great with progressive web apps. I always wanted to use this effect. So let me introduce myself. I'm Nicole, and I'm a UI UX designer, and I'm also a design teacher at Lowagon, which is a coding bootcamp that teaches web development in 9 weeks. So let me refresh your memories a bit. What makes an app a PWA? What are the qualifications for an app to be a progressive web app? So first, a progressive web app is fast because it loads quickly and performs smoothly throughout the whole user experience. That's because of service workers and the best practices for performance. A PWA is progressive because it works everywhere and it's supercharged in modern browsers. So you can enhance the user experience for devices that support more advanced features. Hence the term progressive enhancement. A progressive web app is also connectivity independent. So it works offline and it works with low internet connections. And a PWA is engaging. Users are more likely to use a PWA again more than a normal website. And that's because you could add it to the home screen and there's push notifications. And there are lots of increased conversions and engagement because of PWAs. For example, 5 miles shoppers spend now 20% more time on the current PWA than they did on the previous one. And the Weather Channel saw an 80% improvement in the after shipping PWAs. So now, how can we design great progressive web apps? So let me categorize the best practices for a progressive web app in 3. A progressive web app has to be app-like. It has to have an app-like experience. So how can we make something that looks like a native app but is not really a native app? Also, it should be engaging. So it should have a great experience and should engage the users back to the app. And it should be resilient. It should have a reliable performance. So throughout this talk, I'm going to give you some UX and technical recommendations to make great progressive web apps. So let's start with the first one. How can we make something, a progressive web app that has an app-like experience? Because our progressive web app should meet the user's expectations as if it's a native app. And we have a common tendency to design web-like components for web apps usually. And that's what we shouldn't do. So the first thing we should do is start by taking some UX inspiration from native apps instead of websites. So this is in order to match the user's mental models and use more app-like designs and components. So what I usually do, I browse sites like patterns.com for design inspiration. And patterns.com is a website for inspiration for mobile design apps. Another thing I also do is level up my familiarity with material design. Because since the user expects the design and interaction to look like a native app, then we should be aware of material design and material design system, like interactions and colors and principles of material design. So you could do that at material.io. Another thing you can do is also use material design components. NDC is a modular and customizable UI components library. So in this library, you could use ripple animations, cards, buttons, grids, everything that has to do with a native app on Android. Another thing we can do to make it look like a native app or have an app-like experience is to make sure our app icon looks good. Because the app icon is going to be on the home screen of the user. It will sit next to the other native apps. So it should visually match the other icons. So your app icon should visually match the native app icons. Some phones have like visual standards that it should match in terms of size, in terms of colors. And what we can do is also create a responsive icon that can work in different sizes. So what do I mean by responsive? I mean, it should be simple enough and has no details, no words. It's very simple and a unique shape that can work on all sizes, even if it's a very, very small size. Because your icon is going to be on the splash screen, on the task switcher, inside notification banners, the app install banner, and all of that. And also, this app icon should be great on all platforms, because every platform, since our PWA is going to be used on all platforms, then every platform has some specific requirements. So as you can see here, each icon looks very different on every platform. And for example, on iOS, the icons cannot be transparent and require a background color. If you don't add a background color, they will add the background color for you, like this one in black. So make sure to test that. And the best way to see all this is to use real favicon generator or any generator for favicons. So here you could see all of the variations in one go and lets you make adjustments for every platform. And then it generates the manifest.json. So another thing we can do to make our app a more like native app is also brand our app using the theme color. So the theme color is a great way to give our app a brand and uniqueness for it and feel native with that. But there are two types of theme colors. The first one is the browser theme color. The theme color, this is the theme color that we see when we open the app from a browser. So it's independent from the other app manifest. So here we could use the primary color, the accent color, whatever works with our app. And this is the one you see on the navbar on top. And this is how we do it. We add the meta name, theme color, and the color in the value of the content. The second one is the app theme color. So this is the one that colors the status bar and the header when accessing via home screen. So after the user adds your app to the home screen, then when they open it from the home screen, this is the color they see. So as you can see, the status bar is also colored, and even it shows in the task switcher. And this is how we do that. We add the theme color to the app manifest. We add the theme, color, and the color value. Now, another thing to consider to meet the user's expectations, since we're doing a progressive web app, it can also work on desktop and laptops. So it doesn't always have to be just for mobile. So desktop and laptop and bigger screens are always an extra step that I think we should take. The perfect example of this is Outweb. They have a progressive web app that also works everywhere else on bigger screens. And the nice thing is that it looks exactly like the other progressive web app on mobile, but it's just bigger. So now let's talk about how we can make progressive web app that is more engaging. So we need to make sure that we are responsive to the user's input to promote feedback and engagement. So the first thing we need to do is to give immediate visual feedback whenever the user interacts with the app. And that's how we make it look native. So the first thing we need to know is that we need to consider the best and worst tap areas on mobile. Because after a lot of studies, we realized that actually the best area on the phone is the one in the middle. The worst one is the top left and the bottom right, or bottom left, top right. So you could also test your app and see which one works for you and for your users, but it's good to know and it's good to consider. And also always give immediate visual feedback. Try to respond to the users immediately in under 100 milliseconds. Even if the transition that you're doing is more than 100 milliseconds, try to start responding in 100 milliseconds. Also maintain a minimum touch target size of 48 dp, which means density independent pixels. And this is what material design recommends. This is because if the user touches something and it doesn't interact, it means it might be too small. And this leads to frustration and confusion, and we don't want that, and errors too. So this is to ensure balanced information density and usability. The app install banner is a great way to increase engagement for progressive web apps. So it has the ability to have your users quickly and seamlessly add your app to the home screen. But not a lot of people actually see this or accept this when they see the app install banner, because users are not really familiar with what a progressive web app is yet. It's still a very new thing, and normal users are not really technical. So what we need to do is we need to guide users and tell them that there's something called adding to home screen. So what we can do is we can add like a subtle signifier, and this is what the Flipkart does. As you can see here, there's a plus button and it vibrates a bit. So you tap on it and they show you that you could add a Flipkart to the home screen by tapping on this overflow menu. Now make sure to test this on all your browsers, because sometimes the overflow menu is different on each browser, the position of it. And what we can do also, if the user downloads the app or installs it to the home screen, we can hide this plus button. So it doesn't really be very annoying to the user. It's showing every time. So we can do that by hiding it when the app is standalone. So we add a media query, display mode standalone, and when it's standalone, then we display the button as none. What we can do also is that we can delay the app install banner until after the user engages with your app. So this is also a nice way to do it. Since we cannot really control when to show this app install banner, we can at least delay it. And this is also what they do in Flipkart. After you go and buy a product, then they show you the add to home screen. And that, because they know that we like this app now, so add us to your home screen. So it's a bit more subtle and less annoying. And also soon we'll be able to control this app install banner. So notifications are also a great way to re-engage the user back to the app because of service workers. And so what we can do is first, don't break the user's flow for an update. So if you have an update, don't really show a push notification for it. What you can do is you could show a snack bar, for example, on the top. Get the latest improvements and just tap to refresh. So this is a nicer way that doesn't really disrupt the user's experience. And also, if you want to do a push notification, there are some guidelines for it or just some tips. Push notification should be personal, it should be timely, it should be relevant also to the user. Actionable, if you can add more actions to it or just a call to action. And it should work offline on a progressive web app. So try not to annoy users or spam them with push notifications. Only send notifications when it's very important and when it meets these qualifications. And what we can do also is that we can give users control over their push notifications. So in OutWeb, you could toggle push notifications on and off from the sidebar. And this is a nice way to give the user control on the app. Now, asking for permissions can be tricky a bit. Sometimes we need to ask for location, for the contact, for the camera, but we need to make sure that we're not disrupting the user's experience. For example, don't ask for permission on the first visit. Asking for permission on the first visit of a website can be really annoying because it doesn't have any context. Why would the user accept this? It doesn't really explain why, and it can confuse users because you didn't really earn the trust yet on the first permission, on the first visit. And also, don't use fake Android native banners. I noticed that on Alibaba, on the progressive web app. This is the native one, but the one before it is actually a fake one. It looks the same, but it just has smaller, and you tap on next, and then they will show you the real one. And what you can do is ask for permission when it's relevant. So in SnapWeb PWA, after you go to use my camera, and then they will show you the asking for permission banner. So it's more a respectful way, it's relevant, and it makes sense. Only when the user wants to do that, then we ask the user for permission. Now, in progressive web apps, if the user installs the app to their home screen, it means there's no URL bar on the top, because most of the time the progressive web app will be standalone. So that's why we need to think about how we can provide an easy way to share. Now, luckily, there's the Web Share API, but it's coming soon in the next Chrome. And what it does is that it's a native picker. So after you click on Share, it opens the native picker where you could choose one of the native apps that you have to share with. But this is coming soon. So what we can do now is we could implement a share button that allows the users to copy the URL to the clipboard. So this is a nice way to do it. Or share with a social media platform too. Now, since we're talking about engagement and interaction, it's worth noting that the burger menu that you might be using might be hurting your user experience. Let's see why. Now, even though the burger menu looks cleaner because it hides away some things, but it's kind of out of sight because the user has to have an extra click. He has to click first, so it has a lower discoverability. It's less efficient because he has to click first and then see what options he has. And sometimes the back button will be reserved to the menu because on iOS, we don't really have the, the hardware back button. So they have to be reserved for it or just move the burger menu and add the back button there. So here are some suggestions. What we can do is that we could use tabs. So this is a very common pattern that we all use. And we could either use the icons or icons with tabs, with labels on the top, on the bottom. And now, of course, some of you might be saying, what if I have more than 5 sections? Well, if you have more than 5 sections, what we can do is add a more button or the 3 points, like a menu. So prioritize the 5 main sections and put them out there, and everything else could go into more. So this is a better way because everything is just out there in front of the user. Now, sometimes a burger menu can make sense. For example, like in Uber. In Uber, everything is provided on the main screen. Everything the user needs is there. Only when the user needs secondary screens, like history, options, settings, all of that, then they go into the burger menu. So in this scenario, it does make sense to use a burger menu. Now let's talk about how we could make resilient progressive web apps. First, we need to know that the app should feel local. And that's how we can make it look native. The app should be so fast that it shouldn't load at all. It should feel local. And 53% of mobile users abandon sites that take longer than 3 seconds to load. So that's how users are so impatient nowadays and so distracted, and they want everything right now. So let's see these 2 examples. Now let's look at the first loading, the normal one. When you open a website, usually in most cases, you open it and then you wait on a white screen. Then you wait a little more, and then everything loads at the same time. Now the other type of loading is you tap enter, and then immediately you start seeing components loading after the other. So the other one, the progressive loading, is actually more comfortable for the user because it reduces the user's uncertainty because they start seeing things immediately, and it reduces the perception of time. And that's a great thing. So to do that, we should use the app shell model. The app shell is the minimal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that powers a user interface. So let's see some examples. This is Twitter Lite app shell. For example, they have the nav bar, they have the main action button, and this is also Google Inbox app shell. This can work on all types of sizes, not just for mobile phones. And this is Outweb's app shell that we just saw in action. So as you can see, we have some common components that we use for app shells. For example, we have the nav bar, we have the tab bar. If you have a tab bar or a burger menu, then we have the sidebar, the background color if you have it, and a loader, and the main action if you have that. So these are kind of the common components where you could create an app shell from it. Now it could be less than that, it could be a bit more than that, but try to always keep these types of components for an app shell. Now, what we can do to also make a faster instant first load is that we could inline some of our SVG icons. If you're using icons, then the best way to use an icon is from an SVG instead of PNG, because it's the lightest way. But how can we make it even better? We could inline them. Now, why did I say some of? Because if we inline only the SVG icons above the fold, that the icons that the user sees immediately, then it's great. But if we do that for all our files, then our HTML file will be so huge, which will defeat the purpose. So we need to make sure that we inline only the important ones, the ones the user sees at the first second. Now, fonts are one of the most common reasons of a slow first load, and we know that. But being a designer, I love typography, I love using fonts, but I have to limit them sometimes. And it's worth noting that for progressive web apps, it kind of makes sense to use device fonts, because web fonts are heavy, but device fonts are weightless. So what do I mean by device fonts? I don't mean use Arial or Comic Sans or Helvetica. I mean, what if there's a way to tweak the operating system? So what if there's a way to tweak the font to match the operating system? For example, to use Roboto on Android and San Francisco on iOS. It depends on the operating system. But actually, we can do that. So we could add all the fonts of the devices possible, one after the other. So we stack them one after the other. And let's say here the user is using an Android. Then the browser will read Roboto and just ignore everything else. So that's a great way to actually show device fonts, because the user will feel like home if they're using a progressive web app that is using their device fonts of their operating system. So here, these are the fallbacks for each one. The Apple system is the San Francisco for Safari and on Mac, and the Blink Mac system is the San Francisco on Chrome, and the list goes on. So this is how it looks like. Actually, Medium does this. Medium, they use also the device fonts that I just showed you. And here, as you can see, on iOS, they use San Francisco, because it reads it on San Francisco, and Roboto on Android. Now, if you're using custom fonts or web fonts, it's great if we could preload them. So how can we do that? First, this is the normal scenario. This is where the font files will only start downloading after the CSS finishes, as you can see. And that's not really good. So what we could do is we preload them. We add a link rel preload with the href of Roboto, for example, as font, and add a type as WOF2. It's important to add the cross origin. This is to avoid double requests. So this is what we get. As you can see now, the fonts load simultaneously with the CSS and HTML file. And this avoids the flash of unstyled content. Now, designing for the offline experience is a very important part of a progressive web app. And not just if it's offline, but also if it has a low internet connection. And you might think that there's not really low internet connections. But I come from Lebanon, and in Lebanon, the internet connection is really bad. Like, it's 1 megabyte per second. So there are lots of factors of a bad network connection. It could be poor coverage of a provider, for example. It could be extreme weather conditions. If there's a thunderstorm, for example, the internet connection could just go for like minutes or hours sometimes. It could be power outages. And it could also be traveling into dead zones. And this could happen anywhere. If we're traveling to the metro, sometimes the internet doesn't really work there. So your goal is to provide a good experience that lessens the impact of this internet connection. So here are some tips. What we could do first is we clearly inform the user when a change in state occurs, and we do that as soon as possible. So inform the user what actions they can do when the internet is offline. So in this example, you seem to have a bad network connection. But don't worry, the messages will be sent when the internet is back online. And when the internet is back online, some apps require auto-updating. For example, the weather. Because the weather has the data that you need that are very updated. So the weather doesn't really work if it has old data. So because of that, we need to auto-update here. Now, how you deal with informing the users that the internet is back online will depend on your app. In this example, for example, inform the user that there's newer content with a tap to refresh. if you're reading an article on a news website and you're scrolling through it, it doesn't really make sense to refresh automatically. It's better to tap to refresh because you would lose where you were reading last. And also, you could provide an offline experience by default. If your app doesn't require much data, then you could cache that data or some of that data by default and try to make this experience as stable as possible. And in this example, they're saying that the network is down. These sections are available to read, but these other sections are partially available, for example. And if your data is heavy, you could provide a data saver mode. And this is what Twitter Lite does. They have a data saver mode, which you could toggle on and off from the settings. And as you can see, the images and videos they're not loaded yet until you load them. And this reduced the data usage by up to 70%. And that's a lot. We could also give the user control to download something for offline use. And this makes sense for videos, for example. Because videos are heavy, you could download them and see them later on in the offline section. So this example is Biograph PWA, where you could make available offline for any video. And also inform the user when the app is ready for offline consumption. And make sure the language you're using for this fits your audience. For example, caching complete future visits for work offline is good, but service worker installed, for example, does not really work for normal users. And also give an offline mode color to your theme. It really looks nice if you have an offline theme. For example, if everything is red or everything is blue, and when it's offline, you could just give it a gray color for that. So it looks really nice. Just with color, we could tell the user that you're offline. So an app that lessens the impact of a network failure will feel magical to the user. Now I'm going to talk about more other design considerations. For example, iOS. iOS doesn't fully support progressive web apps. It doesn't support service workers, push notifications, installing to home screen. But the good news is that they're working on it, actually. And that's great news. Apple is finally working on service workers, so it's in development. But meanwhile, we should do something. So what we first do, we could work on the icon title. So the icon title, since the iOS ignores the manifest.json, by default, the title tag is used from the HTML. So what we can do is, to update it, we could add Apple Mobile Web App title to update it. Also, the app icon on iOS is a screenshot by default. I'm not sure why they do that. So what we should do is that we should change that, specify a web app icon. So Apple Touch icon. What we can do also is that we could hide Safari UI components. So this is the Apple Mobile Web App capable. But we need to make sure we test our app because this is a very dangerous and powerful meta tag. And this is why. First, iOS doesn't have a hardware back button. We know that, which means if you open a website, a PWA, and enter a page that doesn't have a back button, then you're stuck there forever. So you need to make sure to test this or add the back button. And also, some links open in the browser in the PWA on iOS. For example, if we enter this from the home screen, and we scroll down and enter one, it goes away from the progressive web app. And that's just really an awful experience. So here are some solutions. The first solution is that we could add a back navigation on all the screens on the PWA, and we could use the location.href instead of the A links for internal navigation. Or the second solution would be to just remove the web app capable meta tag. So keep the icon and meta for the title, but just don't let it open in full screen mode. And this is what Twitter Lite does on iOS. So they have a PWA. You open it from the home screen, but it opens with the browser all on the top. So this is for now, at least. If you want to use the web app capable, you could also change the status bar appearance. So here we have like 3 types of status bar colors. There are some consideration for this. This is the first one, which is content default. It's white. The second one is black. And the third one is black translucent. In the black translucent, the content floats on top of the full screen content, the status bar. So instead of pushing it down, it just floats there. So you might have to push your content accordingly. But although everything on iOS is not really working the best way, a lot of companies actually has a lot of increasing in conversions. For example, AliExpress saw an 82% increase on iOS conversion after building progressive web app. And also the Washington Post has seen a near 5-time increase in user engagement on iOS. And also the Washington Post mixed a progressive web app with an AMP experience. And here we have the difference between the instant mobile web and the current mobile web. So it's allowed to offer a game-changing experience. Now, let's talk a bit about accessibility. Since we're doing a progressive web app, it means it works everywhere. And why not make it work for everyone too? So designing for accessibility might be a challenge, and we tend to forget or just skip it as not being important. But actually, 49 million people suffer from disabilities. And not just permanent disabilities, but it could be anything, from broken arm, from the train being too shaky, or anything. So accessibility refers to the experience of a web app that works anywhere for everyone. And if you design inclusively, you design for everyone. So try to always be aware of global accessibility of colorblind people or low-end devices too, of also countries with expensive data. And try to always design inclusively. And try to always be globally relevant using icons and languages. Because sometimes the user that may be using your app doesn't really understand advanced English, for example. So what we could do is use simple global English language and always be culturally relevant. So use a friendly language for uneducated people and use more icons and fewer words. Also, consider high data cost and low-end phones. Because some countries have very, very expensive data, make sure to always reduce the app size, and we're already doing that with progressive web apps, but make sure to keep this in mind. And also consider small screen sizes. Because some people are still using very old phones, we need to make sure that we're minimizing the battery usage too, and also we could let the users know about data sizes whenever we have heavy data. If you want to test small screen sizes, you could test that at material.io/devices. Also, make better color choices. Since your PWA is going to be used anywhere, it could be used outdoor too. And people with low vision don't really have good vision in outdoor uses. So make sure you're using sufficient contrast. You could also use colorblind simulation filters. You could test the colors for colorblind people on material.io/color. What we can do also is to implement techniques for an accessible website. And there's a great checklist for accessibility on this link, webaim.org. So remember that some users will be using screen readers on, for example, and try to work on the focus elements, on text alternatives, images, and adding labels and inputs and all of that. So I'm going to end this talk with just a question. Should I design separately for iOS and Android? Usually, what makes sense is that you design just one that works anywhere. But actually, some progressive web apps are doing both. For example, Barcelona City app, they use design for iOS and for Android as a progressive web app. So it really depends on what you need, what your users need. Now, the takeaway of this talk would be, first, to take inspiration from native apps. Try to always think like you're doing something as a native app instead of a website. Test on the crappiest devices that you could find using remote debugging. And apply checklists just like this one you just saw. And from that, you can truly build amazing experiences on the web. If you want to know more on progressive web app and on UX tips, the best way to see this is on Google Web Fundamentals on these two links. And I hope you enjoyed the talk, and let me know if you have any questions. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitter. Thank you.